The second Jasmine Crockett walked into that ornate committee room, you could feel something shift. It was the kind of hush that doesn't happen because of respect, it happens because everyone senses a storm is coming. Pam Bombi was already seated at the witness table, stacks of folders in front of her like a fortress. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, hungry for the clash they knew was inevitable. Pam smiled that polished, practiced smile. She'd been Attorney General of Florida. She'd debated on prime time. She knew how to control a room. Or she thought she did. Jasmine didn't bother with pleasantries. She adjusted her microphone, locked eyes with Pam, and said, calm as a midnight sky, I've read your statements. All 27 pages. A murmur rippled across the chamber. Jasmine continued, her tone steady but sharp. And I have just one question before we go any further, do you actually believe the law is your personal weapon? Pam shifted in her chair, her lips pressing together. She opened her folder like she was about to recite a prepared defense. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She was already leaning in, voice low, refusing to let the room breathe. Because from where I'm sitting, she said, your record looks less like public service, and more like a pattern of selective justice. Pam's hand froze mid-page. The camera zoomed closer. The room was silent, waiting to see if she'd dare to answer. Pam's carefully rehearsed confidence cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough that everyone noticed. She cleared her throat. Congresswoman Crockett, I've always enforced the law fairly. It's not my fault if certain communities commit more crimes. The sentence hung in the air, sour and heavy. A journalist near the back gasped. Jasmine didn't react right away. She tilted her head as if she needed to hear it twice. Then she exhaled, slow and deliberate. That, she said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, is exactly why we're here. She leaned forward until her reflection glinted in Pam's water glass. You stood on national television and called it justice when your office pursued petty charges against poor single mothers, while you looked the other way for your campaign donors. You called it law and order when black teenagers were locked up over school fights. You think I didn't do my homework? Jasmine's hand moved to a thick folder. You've mistaken this hearing for your press conference. But out there, she gestured past the cameras, to the millions watching live, people see you. They've lived under your idea of justice. Pam's composure slipped further. She glanced to the chairman for rescue, but none came. Jasmine was still talking, her tone soft but edged like a blade. You know what I see? Jasmine asked. I see a woman who used the courts like a private cudgel, who thinks consequences are for other people. But today, she flipped the folder open, revealing a list of cases. You finally have to answer for it. The audience was silent. No one dared look away. Even Pam's own aide stopped taking notes. And Jasmine hadn't even started reading the receipts yet. Jasmine's fingers tapped the folder once, lightly, like a signal, and then she began to read. Each case number, each date, each name landed like a drumbeat. Case 14-082. Maria Delgado. Single mother. Arrested for failure to comply when she fell behind on court fees. Jailed 12 days. Lost her job. Your office called it a necessary deterrent. Jasmine looked up. Deterrent for what? Being poor? Pam's jaw tightened. The camera zoomed closer, catching the flush creeping up her neck. Case 19-143. Jamal Price. 17. Prosecuted as an adult for a fight that left no injuries. The prosecutor you personally promoted called him a danger to the community. You signed off. He spent 2 years in county before the appeal threw it out. Jasmine paused. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were shining, not with tears, but with something deeper. Rage that had settled into clarity. And while all this was happening, she continued, your campaign received donations from the same private detention company that held Jamal. Tens of thousands of dollars. You declared it, technically, but you never disclosed the meetings you took with their lobbyists. You called that transparency. Pam's mouth opened, searching for a retort, but Jasmine kept going, her words unbroken. You built your reputation on a myth, that you were the last honest enforcer in a system everyone else had abandoned. But the truth is simpler. You weren't protecting justice. You were protecting your own power. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Pam tried to gather her papers, but her hands trembled just enough that the microphone picked up the soft rustle. Jasmine closed the folder. And let me say this plainly, so no one here or watching at home can twist it, real justice doesn't look like crushing the most vulnerable so you can look tough on TV. Real justice means the rules apply to you, too. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. And Jasmine knew she had only just begun. Pam finally found her voice, but it sounded thinner now, like a thread pulled too tight. Representative Crockett, she began, forcing a composed tone, you're cherry-picking. You don't understand the pressure of ensuring public safety. Jasmine didn't blink. I understand perfectly. You just don't like that for once, you're the one answering questions. Gasps fluttered across the press row. Pam tried to keep her chin lifted, but her eyes flicked toward the exit for a split second, an instinct to run she probably hadn't felt in years. You built a career on the backs of people who couldn't fight back, Jasmine went on. You branded them as threats, as criminals, as liabilities, anything to justify treating them like disposable statistics. And when the cameras were off, when the donations came in, you called that leadership. She leaned forward, lowering her voice so it drew the entire room closer. You want to talk about pressure? Try telling a mother her son won't be home because the DA's office needed another example. Try explaining to a father why his child is locked up for petty theft while the same court lets millionaires walk free for tax fraud. That's pressure. Pam's lips parted, but no words came out. Jasmine let the silence do the work for her, then picked up one more file, thicker than the rest. These are letters, she said, her voice steady. Written by the families of the people your policies destroyed. They're not cherry-picked. They're just the ones who survived long enough to write. She set the folder down between them with a final, deliberate tap. I don't expect you to read them. I expect America to. In that moment, even the cameras seemed to pause, as if they knew they were capturing something that would outlast a news cycle. The weight of the letters between them was heavier than any indictment Jasmine could have drafted. Pam stared down at the folder like it might burst open and swallow her whole. You can pretend this is about policy disagreements, Jasmine continued, her voice low but unshakable. But we both know it's simpler than that. You made choices, calculated choices, to turn fear into currency. And now you want everyone to forget. Pam drew in a shallow breath. This is political theater, she rasped, trying to reclaim the narrative. No, Jasmine said, shaking her head. This is what accountability sounds like when it's too late to rebrand. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Even the committee chair looked rattled. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. She gestured around the room. All these cameras, all these headlines, they'll fade. But the people you hurt? They'll remember your name long after your talking points are forgotten. Pam's jaw clenched. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She reached for the folder but stopped, hand hovering an inch above the cover, fingers trembling. Jasmine took a slow step closer, lowering her voice so only Pam could hear. You wanted to be remembered as a trailblazer. You will be. But not for the reasons you imagined. Pam's hand dropped to her side. She didn't look up again. At the far end of the chamber, a reporter mouthed the words to her cameraman, "Get this. All of it." Jasmine straightened, letting the silence stretch. And in that breathless hush, you could feel the whole narrative tipping over, exposing what lay underneath, ugly, undeniable, real. Pam's silence was louder than any outburst. She just stood there, shoulders drawn tight as if bracing for an impact that had already landed. Jasmine didn't fill the quiet with more condemnation. She let the reality settle, because sometimes the truth didn't need amplification. It needed space to breathe. Finally, Pam spoke, voice brittle. "You think you've won something here?" Jasmine tilted her head slightly, studying her. "This isn't about winning. It's about telling the story straight, for once." Pam looked up, her eyes glossy but defiant. "I did what I believed was right. You'll twist that however you need to." "That's the difference between us," Jasmine said softly. "You think calling people accountable is twisting facts. I think it's the least we owe the public." A flicker of something crossed Pam's face, shame, recognition, it was hard to tell. But she didn't deny it. A young staffer in the front row swallowed hard, scribbling every word. In that moment, she wasn't just watching a hearing, she was witnessing a reckoning that no press release could sanitize. Jasmine took another step back and addressed the committee. "If we pretend that leadership excuses everything, that titles erase consequences, then we're no better than the systems we criticize. I won't be part of that." Pam finally lowered her gaze. The folder sat between them like a quiet verdict. The committee chair cleared his throat, but didn't interrupt. No one did. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman in a plain blue dress wiped her cheek. She didn't know Jasmine personally. She was just there to see if anyone in power would finally say out loud what so many lived every day. And in that hush, Jasmine's voice was the only thing that sounded like justice. The cameras captured every angle, but it was the people behind the cameras that mattered now. A woman in her 60s, pressed into the back row, whispered to the person beside her, "Finally. Someone saying it." Jasmine heard it even through the muffled noise. That one sentence meant more than any headline would. Pam tried to regain her composure. "So what's your solution, Congresswoman? Tear it all down?" Jasmine folded her arms, her tone cool but never cruel. "No. I'm saying if your definition of justice is whatever keeps you comfortable, it was never justice at all." Pam's lips pressed together, her jaw tight. For the first time since she'd started her political climb, she didn't have a ready comeback. In the audience, a row of young interns watched, wide-eyed. Some of them would go home that night and replay this moment on their phones. Others would talk about it over cheap takeout, reminding each other that conviction didn't have to sound like shouting. And maybe, Jasmine thought, that was how real change started, not with applause, not with a viral clip, but with the quiet certainty that someone refused to lie to keep the peace. "You want to know what real justice looks like?" Jasmine asked, voice lower now. "It's when the truth finally outweighs your image. When consequences are not optional. When leadership doesn't mean hiding behind the right slogans while the people who trusted you get nothing." Pam swallowed. She looked away, studying a crack in the committee table as though it might open and swallow her whole. But no crack was coming. No exit. Just the truth, sitting there between them, undeniable. Jasmine turned to the committee chair. "I yield the rest of my time." But she knew she hadn't really yielded anything. Because for everyone watching, something had just shifted. There was a beat, just one breath of silence, before the room erupted in a rustle of whispers, pens scratching furiously across notepads, cameras swiveling. Pam didn't move. Her eyes locked on the table in front of her, the color draining from her face. It was one thing to be challenged on policy. It was another to have the thin veneer of righteousness peeled away for everyone to see. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply looked at Pam like she was seeing her clearly for the first time, and maybe, she thought, for the first time Pam was seeing herself too. "You said you did what you believed was right," Jasmine said quietly. But believing you're right doesn't mean you are. It doesn't erase the damage. It doesn't buy you forgiveness. Pam's jaw clenched. And you think you're so much better? No, Jasmine replied. I think I'm honest about who I serve. I think I'm willing to be held to the same standards I demand of you. The moment hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. Then Jasmine did something no one expected. She reached across the table and set the folder of evidence closer to Pam. Not in triumph, but in invitation. You can keep pretending this is an attack, Jasmine said, her voice as steady as it had been from the start. Or you can pick this up and decide what kind of legacy you want to leave. A hush fell over the entire chamber. Even the committee chair didn't try to move things along. For a split second, Pam looked like she might reach for it. Her hand hovered over the folder, trembling, and then she pulled it back to her lap instead. That was it. That was the choice. And in that choice, every pretense she'd built started to collapse. One by one, the staffers behind Jasmine began to lift their heads. Even the ones who'd been skeptical were different now. Because they had all just witnessed what happens when truth is delivered without apology. After that moment, it didn't matter what Pam said next. No statement, no prepared line, no practiced moral high ground could erase the image of her refusing to touch the evidence that would have proven, or disproven, everything. The cameras caught every detail, the way her hand hovered, how her gaze dropped, the split second her mask slipped. Reporters started drafting headlines before the hearing even ended. Pam Bombi freezes as Jasmine Crockett lays down the facts. Congresswoman delivers blistering lesson on accountability. But for Jasmine, it wasn't about headlines. It was about the people watching who'd never once been in a room like this. The single moms on folding chairs at community centers, the minimum wage workers who couldn't afford a lobbyist, the public defenders still fighting for clients no one cared about. They were the reason she'd stayed calm. They were why she didn't need to shout. Pam swallowed hard and finally managed a single sentence. I hope you're proud of yourself. I'm not, Jasmine answered simply. I'm proud of what this moment could mean for the people you tried to ignore. Someone in the back, a woman in a gray blazer, clapped once. The sound was swallowed by the tension, but then another clap followed, and another, until half the room was applauding. Pam looked around, her face straining between anger and something that almost looked like regret. The chair tapped his gavel, but the moment couldn't be contained. Because once the truth is out in the open, it doesn't go back in the folder. And that was Jasmine's real victory, not humiliating an opponent, but forcing the country to see a system that rewards the performance of caring over the practice of it. She took a slow breath, feeling the adrenaline start to fade. She'd made her point. Now the question was what everyone else would do with it. Outside, the air smelled like autumn rain and fresh exhaust. Reporters were already pushing microphones toward Jasmine as she stepped onto the Capitol steps, but she didn't stop. She didn't need to say another word. The clip was everywhere, news feeds, group chats, hashtags burning through social media. A woman with a toddler on her hip stopped her near the street. "Ma'am," she said, voice trembling, "I never thought I'd see someone talk to them like that." Jasmine rested a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You deserve leaders who don't flinch." Behind her, Pam Bombi emerged from the building surrounded by aides who whispered rapid instructions. She didn't meet Jasmine's gaze this time. She just kept her eyes locked on the curb, as though she could walk away from the echo of what had happened inside. One reporter shouted, "Representative Crockett, what do you call what we witnessed today?" Jasmine paused at the car door, glancing back over her shoulder. "I call it a start," she said, voice steady, clear enough that everyone heard. "Because real justice doesn't end when the cameras turn off." Inside the car, she closed her eyes, feeling the fatigue settle in her bones, but also a fierce, unshakable clarity. She knew that moment would ripple far beyond any headline. Some would call it disrespect. Some would call it performance. But the people who needed it most would recognize it for what it was, proof that no title, no privilege, no polished statement could bury the truth forever. As the car pulled away from the Capitol, Jasmine opened her phone to hundreds of messages, some angry, some grateful, all proof that her voice had carried. And she knew she'd carry it again, for as long as it took. If you felt something today, whether it was anger, relief, or the spark of recognition, you're not alone. This story wasn't about one committee hearing or a single confrontation. It was about exposing the gap between what power claims to be and what it actually does. Jasmine Crockett didn't set out to make a scene. She set out to remind everyone that justice isn't polite, and it isn't always comfortable. It's honest. It's unflinching. And sometimes, it sounds exactly like this. If you believe more people deserve to be heard, to be seen, and to hold the powerful accountable, stay with us. Because this is only the beginning.